Welcome to The Flirty Vegan, the podcast that motivates you to thrive through plant-based living. I'm your host, Jenny Chaffetz, certified life, breathwork, and vegan lifestyle coach. After decades of dieting and deprivation, I found the secret to living a compassionate, nourished life. Whether you've been vegan for years or you're just flirting with the idea, prepare to be inspired by real people who courageously chose health and love. It's time to look better, feel better, and do better. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Flirty Vegan. I'm your host, Jenny Chaffetz, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether it's your first time tuning in or you're a loyal listener, I would appreciate it if you would take a second to click that like or subscribe or follow button wherever you are listening so that you can get all the latest episodes as soon as they drop. And I would also love it if you would take a moment to write a short review. You can do that on Apple. And also you can engage with the show. You can write comments on Spotify and YouTube. And that engagement really helps the show grow and attract new listeners. And at The Flirty Vegan, we are all about attracting a bigger audience because the messages that are shared on this show are so rich, so important, so valuable, and they deserve to be heard. And today is going to be a phenomenal conversation because I am joined by the incomparable, world-famous, renowned author and speaker, Dr. Melanie Joy. Melanie Joy, PhD, is a Harvard-educated psychologist, international trainer, and author of 8 books, including the award-winning Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows, Beyond Beliefs, a guide to improving relationships and communication for vegans, vegetarians, and meat eaters, and How to End Injustice Everywhere. She is the 8th recipient of the Institute of Jainology's Ahimsa Award, which was previously given to Nelson Mandela and the Dalai Lama. Her work has been featured by media outlets around the world, including the BBC, ABC Australia, NPR, and the New York Times. She is also the founding president of the nonprofit organization Beyond Carnism. You can learn more about her work at carnism.org and all of the links that are provided in the show notes. And this word, carnism, which Melanie coined and explains fully in this conversation, is such an interesting concept because most people I encounter think of veganism as a philosophy that exists kind of outside of the general collective population. However, what Melanie explains is that everyone, everywhere, is behaving because they believe in a philosophy. So the flip side of veganism is something called carnism, which means that a person believes it is okay to eat some animals and not others, have some animals as household pets and not others, wear the skins of some animals and not others. And it's just a really interesting way to understand humanity. So I really hope that you will listen to this conversation through an unbiased lens, really be curious like a student of her work because it's fascinating and also super inspiring. Because like myself, Melanie grew up eating meat and adoring her pets, loving animals. And so we both fell into that big bucket of people who love dogs, eat pigs, and wear cows, which is why the title of her book is so on point. And if after listening to this conversation, you have an epiphany that loving dogs while also eating pigs or cows, sheep, lamb, turkey, chicken, fish, whatever, feels kind of icky or unaligned, then please go to the show notes, click on the link for a free connection call, and let's talk. I know going vegan sounds extreme. I've heard it all, and frankly, I've felt a lot of it myself. But I also know that for myself and clients, going vegan is a lot simpler than people realize, especially in 2026, where the plentiful offerings at restaurants, convenience stores, supermarkets, big box stores, warehouse clubs are fantastic and readily accessible. And something else that I'm offering now is in person, if you live near me, or virtual grocery store tours and meal planning. So if you do want to make this transition to veganism, I want to make it as streamlined as possible for you. So again, go to the show notes, click the link for a free connection call, and we can talk about all of it. Now, let's get into this comprehensive conversation with Dr. Melanie Joy. I am here right now, face to face with the Dr. Melanie Joy, who I've just had on a pedestal for the last 5 years, ever since going vegan. Your books have been suggested to me and referenced and quoted and all the things. So, Dr. Melanie Joy, welcome to the Flirty Vegan Podcast.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. That's really, yes, I'm very touched and thank you. And it's really a pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
And I have so many places I want to go. Before I get to the first question, I want to say, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times from super fans, the title of your book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows. I mean, I get why you picked the title, because it's the question that we ask all the time, and it's just brilliant. So kudos to that one, just right off the bat.
Thank you.
I like to start off every conversation with this question because this show is listened to by people who are not necessarily vegan. I had a show for 100 episodes prior to it taking the vegan turn. So many of those people don't focus on animal advocacy and maybe aren't even considering a vegan lifestyle, but hopefully after all these episodes, they will. So I like to ask my guests, for all the people flirting with veganism, what attracted you to this lifestyle?
Sure. Well, I love to hear that you have a lot of listeners who are following you, who probably, my guess is that they do eat plants and lots of them, but they're not identified as plant-based or vegan, right? So,
Right.
but clearly, there's an openness to and interest in this topic, or they wouldn't be following you. And that's,
Sure.
and that's wonderful. And I love that. And I would love to actually speak to that. Just to answer your question, what attracted me to this topic was it was probably, like it is for many people, is my own personal journey, my own personal story, right? Like many people in the West anyway, and many places in the world, actually, I grew up with a dog who I loved like a family member. And I also grew up eating animals, eat meat, eggs, and dairy. A lot of meat, eggs, and dairy. And I was also a person who really cared about animals, again, like most people who do, and would never have willingly contributed to their extensive suffering, especially when that suffering was totally unnecessary. And yet, I was doing that every day, multiple times a day. And so, over the course of so many years, and so many meals, I never thought about how strange it was that I could pet my dog with one hand while I ate a pork chop with the other, a pork chop that had once been an animal who was at least as sentient and intelligent as my dog. I didn't connect the dots between the meat on my plate and the living being it once was. But all of that changed in 1989. I was 23 at the time, and I ate a hamburger that turned out to have been contaminated with Campylobacter. It's basically the red meat version of salmonella. Anyway, I got wildly, spectacularly ill, and I wound up hospitalized. I was on intravenous antibiotics. And after that experience, I basically became like a vegetarian by accident. When you're really sick and you're like vomiting sick, like, let's just say intestinal sick, you never want to like touch the food you just ate again, so I was just like, oh my God, I'm never eating meat again. And so I had to learn about how to cook for myself. And, this is like before the internet. And
Sure.
As I was learning about how to be a vegetarian, essentially, I, stumbled upon information about animal agriculture. And then what I learned just shocked and horrified me. I could not believe the extent of suffering and harm that was happening to animals, to the environment, to public health, to my own body. This is back in the 80s before they knew anything like close to what they know today.
That's what's crazy. Yeah.
So I was just like, I was shocked and horrified. I became vegan at some point, during this journey of discovery. And but what shocked me in some ways even more than what I was learning was that nobody I talked to was willing to hear what I have to say. They would always respond with something like, "Don't tell me that, you'll ruin my meal," or they'd
La
call
la
me
la la
like
la.
a radical vegan hippie propagandist.
Mhm.
I was biased and I was like, oh my God. And these were my friends and my family. They were rational people, just like I had been my whole life. They were
Mhm.
compassionate people. Many of them were very, progressive, and they supported a better world for
Right.
everyone, and yet, they would just stop thinking and feeling, shut down the conversation when it came
Yeah.
to eating animals. And so I became really curious as to how caring, rational people could just like shut down that caring and rational thinking when it came to an issue that is causing so many problems in such a profound way in our personal lives and in our world. I was like, what is going on here? And so
Yeah.
that led me eventually to do the research that I did when I did my doctoral work in psychology. And I wrote my thesis, my PhD thesis, on the psychology of eating animals. And that was what eventually evolved into my book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows. And here we are today. That was sort of like the journey.
Yeah. That's so amazing. And here's a funny twist on your story. Back in, let's say, 1999, I had a food poisoning incident, not to the extent of yours, but just your run-of-the-mill food poisoning incident after eating a chicken dish at the Olive Garden. And my response to that, unlike yours, was to swear off Olive Garden, not
Mm-hmm.
swear off
Mm-hmm.
chicken, not to
Mm-hmm.
question the food, but to question the chef, the rest
Mm-hmm.
of the establishment. I look back on that and say, you're a smart girl. Why didn't you connect those dots that it was probably nothing that Olive Garden did? I'm sure a lot of what they make is perfectly fine. Why didn't I question the chicken itself?
Well, that's the $1 million question. And to be fair, it probably was something that Olive Garden did. And it
Sure.
also is much more likely for that kind of problem to arise when it comes to carnistic or animal products, right?
Right. It
Than it
wasn't
is
the
with
pasta
plant products,
primavera that
right?
was, yeah,
Right. It could have happened in the pasta primavera, but it's a lot less likely
right.
to.
Yeah.
And you're not connecting the dots is actually a perfect example of, this bizarre psychology of eating animals that we're going to
Yeah.
talk about,
Yeah.
just like my not connecting the dots was. Like, how is it so many of us, some of the most, renowned thought leaders and critical thinkers in the world, who may in fact be promoting, global peace and harmony,
Yeah.
are eating animals because there is, and I write about this in my book, and this gap in our consciousness. We're not making a connection. We're not seeing what is right in front of us. And there is a reason for that. It's, not happening in a vacuum.
Right. Okay. So this reason that it's happening, this carnism, this ingrained, we're all indoctrinated into this concept of we eat these animals, we don't eat these animals, we have these animals as pets, but these animals are slaughtered, these animals get hunted. And in your book, you talk about the three N's, the fact that there is this carnism concept because eating some animals, if I understood this correctly, is normal, natural, and necessary. So it gets passed along that we're gonna keep eating meat because we need to. It's normal. It's part of our tradition. It's what we do. How are we ever going to bridge the gap when the carnism life is so strong, that carnism concept is so strong?
Well, let me, before we talk about like what happens, like how carnism stays alive, let's talk for some listeners who aren't familiar with this concept of
Right,
carnism,
sure.
about what exactly it is. And I'll backtrack a little bit and really start like just talk about the psychology that I started talking about. So,
Hmm.
because you're 100% right. And I think you're asking, one of the most important questions that needs to be asked is, how do we close the gap, and how do we work to transform a system that for most people is still invisible, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
so, to sort of answer that, let's go back a little bit and, I'll talk a little bit about what was happening in my research, right? So I was asking this question, as I told you, what's going on in our mind that we care about animals and yet we eat animals? How is it possible that, we're disgusted by the idea of eating cats and dogs, and yet we find pigs and chickens and cows appetizing, and yet in other places in the world, they're disgusted by eating pigs or, cows, and yet might find chickens appetizing. And so, it's really, there's something very odd that's going on in our minds. There's these mental gymnastics.
Yes.
And so what my research led me to uncover is that these mental gymnastics, I was interviewing meat eaters and butchers, meat cutters who worked at the deli, people who had raised and killed their own animals for food, lots of different people, including vegans and vegetarians, about their former sort of orientation and how that changed for them. And, I was struck by the fact that every single person I interviewed had exactly the same experience with eating or not eating animals. Everyone felt conflicted. Everyone had this feeling of like, I wouldn't want to harm an animal, this feeling of like, I would never eat those animals, but this handful of 5 animals I considered appetizing. These mental gymnastics were just kind of astounding. And I realized like this bizarre psychology, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. I didn't randomly get a handful of people or a bunch of people who all happen to have the same strange psychology, right? So I realized that this psychology is, this mentality of meat is the product of a widespread belief system. And I named that belief system Carnism. So Carnism is essentially, it's the invisible belief system that conditions us to eat certain animals. It's basically the opposite of veganism. We tend to assume that only vegans and vegetarians follow a belief system, right? But the only reason we might eat pigs but not dogs, for example, is because we do have a belief system when it comes to eating animals. When eating animals is not a necessity for survival, which is true for people who can afford to make their food choices freely, then it's a choice. And choices always stem from beliefs, but this belief system is invisible. So we don't even realize that we're following its dictates when we're eating animals. And carnism is it's international. It's a global system, right? In mediated cultures around the world, people learn to classify a small handful of species as edible. All the rest they classify as inedible. And members of all cultures tend to find their own choices to be rational and the choices of other cultures to be irrational, disgusting, and even morally offensive a lot of the time. So even though the type of animal consumed changes from culture to culture, the relationship with eating animals is the same. And now, let me just quickly, for people who are like, okay, well, what is this psychology she's talking about? Let me unpack this a little bit. So carnism is not just any kind of a belief system. It's what's called a dominant belief system. That means it's so widespread that it's invisible. It's woven through the very structure of society, essentially, to shape norms, laws, beliefs, behaviors, and so on. And it affects all social institutions, government, business. You look at like meat subsidies and, nutrition, medicine, veterinary medicine. So when somebody studies nutrition, they're actually studying carnistic nutrition. When you study medicine, you're studying carnistic medicine. So this carnistic bias is woven right through society, and yet as soon as somebody challenges that bias or questions it, they're labeled biased and silenced very often. We tend to only perceive those who challenge the dominant way of thinking as biased. And because most people share the same universal core moral values, of compassion, basically caring, whether they would use that word or not, most people really do not believe that it is the right thing to do to cause harm to another being, human or non-human, unnecessarily. Most people, are very uncomfortable with the idea. They would never support a system like carnism, and yet most people do support it. Carnism is a violent system. It just runs counter to our deepest values. And so in order to get people to participate in the system every single day, it's not intentional by carnism, but certain industries are intentional about this. Systems like carnism need to distort our perceptions, right? So that we act against our authentic feelings, our empathy, and against our values without even realizing it. So, for example, right? Imagine that you are not a vegan and you're sitting down and you're biting into a juicy hamburger, and your dining companion turns to you and says, "Well, Jenny, that's actually not made from beef. It's made from golden retrievers." Now, chances are, let's think about this. Chances are what you just thought of as food, that's your perceptions, you now think of as a dead animal. So therefore, what you just felt was delicious, you now feel is disgusting.
Yes.
And your behavior will change. So instead of continuing to eat the animal, the burger, you probably throw it in the trash and maybe even want to take to the streets and protest.
Yes.
That is your authentic reaction. It is the reaction that you have when you haven't been deeply conditioned by carnism. And so when we are born into this system of carnism, this like, this belief system, we inherit its logic. We internalize it. We absorb its logic as our own. We all look at the world through the lens of carnism. And these distortions, they are actually defense mechanisms. They're psychological defense mechanisms that disconnect us from the reality of what we're doing when we're eating animals, when we're supporting the slaughter and consumption of animals. And so this is how we have this bizarre psychology. We've all absorbed it from the system. And carnism causes us to use this psychology over and over and over again. And so you gave one example of carnistic defenses, which is one defense is justification, right? We learn to justify eating animals by learning to believe in what I call the 3 N's of justification. Eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary. Arguments that have been used to justify violent practices throughout history, from male dominance to heterosexual supremacy.
Yeah. So going back to what you said, when you first learned what you learned, saw what you saw, and couldn't turn back to who you were before, and you wanted to, as you referenced, take to the streets and tell everyone you knew what you learned, and the response was, "I don't want to hear it. Leave me alone. This is my food. You're going to make me hate my dinner, so stop." That's obviously still something every vegan I know experiences on a regular basis. So I believe a natural response to that is, for those of us trying to share this message, is to feel anger. So anger, I have read, is a normal, justifiable response to recognizing an injustice and feeling sparked, and maybe even feeling unable to do anything, feeling stuck. So how have you personally, and what do you recommend to the listener do to manage those feelings, those really strong feelings of anger that come up almost every time we try to talk to someone?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question that you ask. And it is true. Carnism basically conditions people. It is organized around these psychological defense mechanisms. This is what my research revealed. And then in my later work, I talk about how all systems that are unjust, they're all structured in a very similar way, whether it's carnism or classism or patriarchy or racism, right? They're structured in the same way. The victims of the systems will all have unique experiences, of course, but the mentality that drives those systems is the same. And so carnism, like other oppressive or unjust systems, conditions people to feel defensive against anyone or anything that challenges their perception of their right to eat animals, right? It conditions people to resist anyone or anything that would get them out of the carnistic box they don't even realize they're in. So and very often, many vegans, as you point out, all you have to do is say, "I'm vegan," and you can, experience this resistance. And it shows up in all these different ways, where you might suddenly be on the receiving end of a lecture about all of the ways that veganism is wrong by a person who never heard the word vegan before you taught them it 5 minutes ago, right? So there's a lot of defensiveness. I mean, fortunately, this is changing, and it has been changing a lot over the years. But to your point, there's still a lot there. And for many people who have made the connection, and they're like, okay, I've seen what's happening. I should back up for a second. I have a video. We created a video called What to Say to Vegans. And it's an 8-minute video that shows what the world looks like through the eyes of a vegan. And it invites people into the conversation. You can show it to your friends and family if you want to open up a dialogue without having to worry about, keeping your anger in check or whatever.
Mhm.
And it's one of the things that I talk about in this video is, it's an animated video, is, imagine if you, a non-vegan, woke up one day and you discovered that all the meat on your plate actually came from puppies and kittens who had been tortured to death. You'd want to stand on the rooftops. You'd want to be shouting. You'd want to spend every minute of the rest of your life stopping the brutality. You'd feel such a sense of urgency.
Yes.
And this is very often what happens when something kind of punctures or pierces this veil of carnism in people. We want to we have this urgency. We want to end the suffering. And we're met with resistance. And it can be very hard, A, not to get angry at that resistance, and B, not to, simultaneously judge a person for eating animals. And so there are a few ways to deal with this. One is to, understand carnism. When you understand carnism, you understand that good people can participate in harmful behaviors and it doesn't make them bad people. Like all of us, like the level of conditioning is extreme. And when somebody tries to change their position or role in a system, it can be very difficult for them. I have had people literally weeping in front of me, like literally crying, saying, Melanie, I really want to stop eating animals and I know it's going to tear my family apart. I can't do it. I cannot live through that. And for a vegan listening, they might think, well, it's your comfort versus life or death. But, it's hard for people to just suddenly step out of a system and change. And that's does not make them bad people. So understanding carnism can actually go a long way. Understanding as well that, when many vegans believe that the solution, capital T, capital S, is to get everybody to go vegan. And then we'll have, we'll end animal suffering. Now, there's truth in the fact that as long as people are eating animals, there's going to be quite a lot of animal suffering. There's no question. It's also true that probably the most effective and quickest route to ending farmed animal suffering, which is the vast majority of domesticated animal suffering, is not by expecting people to become vegan, but asking people to be as vegan as possible. We don't need everybody to be vegan. We need enough people to be vegan enough to tip the scales, and then things will change quite quickly. And a lot of the frustration that vegans feel is this frustration of like, it's so hard to get somebody to go vegan. What's wrong with you? You're not vegan. When we recognize that, I always recommend asking people to be as vegan as possible. When you ask somebody to be as vegan as possible, number one, you're respecting them because only another person knows what's possible for them.
Yeah.
There's a lot less defensiveness and you're much more likely to get that change. I have a couple of other tips too, but I want to pause there because I just talked for a long time.
And thank you. That was so helpful. But I'm gonna challenge you on something. So I want to hear your response. So I've heard you say the be as vegan as possible thing before, and it's a concept that most of us vegans walk around saying, at least those of us in a coaching relationship, we're saying, do what you can. Can you do one meal a day, the whole veganuary movement, or can you meatless Monday? There's all these cute tricks to get people to reduce the animal consumption, which is great. Obviously, anyone who is choosing not to eat an animal, even at this one meal, that's helpful. And I applaud that. However, I feel like there are a lot of vegans who say those things and it's almost like selling out. It's like we're slicing off little pieces of our heart when we say that because we're compromising our values by saying, can you just do a little? How do we live with ourselves or settle in to a comfortable place of saying, can you just be a little bit better?
I mean, well, first of all, it's a good question, and I've heard it a lot, and I understand where it comes from. And first of all, when it does come to changing attitudes in other ways, people don't change overnight. People don't. I mean, I've worked on helping men move beyond patriarchy, and just saying, can you just be a feminist? It just doesn't work. Like it's so
Mm-hmm.
deeply ingrained. Patriarchal attitudes are so deeply ingrained. It's like, okay, can you work on this?
Mm-hmm.
Let's work on this for now. It doesn't happen overnight. That's number one. Number two, it's not a realistic comparison when we're talking about advocacy. It's not a realistic comparison when we're talking about vegan advocacy and anti-racism advocacy or feminist advocacy, because we are, most people, granted, things are backsliding at the moment, but let's just, put that on put that to the side for now. But most people would agree that racism is wrong and they don't want to be a racist. Most
Right.
people would agree that misogyny is wrong and they don't want to be a misogynist. It is illegal to engage in acts that are, violating basic human rights and, in various ways. And most people believe that eating animals is the right thing to do. And it's a behavior that is not only legal, but it is celebrated and
Yes.
frowned upon not to do. So
Mm-hmm.
psychologically, these movements are very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say to somebody, you challenge somebody on their racism or on their misogyny, right? You are challenging somebody who is violating a social norm that the vast majority of society is, at least overtly thinks is reprehensible.
Right.
It's like when people compare meat-free Mondays with rape-free Thursdays. Rape is illegal, number one.
Right.
Number
Right.
two, the vast majority of people in the world recognize that that is a reprehensible act.
Yes.
Eating meat is celebrated, encouraged, indoctrinated, and
Subsidized.
subsidized and encouraged. So,
Yeah.
from a psychological perspective, it does not
Right.
make sense to be comparing these
Yeah.
and to be thinking that one form of advocacy or an advocacy for one movement would work with advocacy for another movement. So, yeah, when you say to somebody, could you be as vegan as possible? You're working within the existing system. And I have heard a lot of vegans say, I don't want to be a sellout. I don't want to compromise my values. And, I think that most of us who are advocating veganism or advocating on behalf of other animals, our highest value is the integrity of our mission. And what that means is that we're committed to doing the best that we can do to reduce harm as quickly and effectively as possible. And that means learning enough about psychological realities so that we can communicate and advocate in a way that's effective. And, Terrence Real, the psychotherapist, he says, I ask my client, I tell my clients when I'm working with couples, you've got a choice, you can be married or you can be right. You decide what you want to be. And I would say to vegans, you can be effective or you can be right, and I would say right and effective are actually synonymous. So if for me, of course, I would love it if I could say, oh, hey, guess what? This is what I've learned. This is what's happening to animals. And people who hear me are like, okay, I'm going to stop eating animals, right? But that's just not the psychological reality we live in. And
Yeah.
I care so much about reducing harm as quickly as possible that I just want to do what works.
Well said. You know those people, they serve you something really delicious and then you ask them for the recipe and they get all secretive and dismissive because they don't want to share it? Well, I'm not one of those people. I have the most amazing chocolate chip cookie recipe that I veganized and I want to share it with you. This recipe is in a cookbook. It won Best of New Hampshire chocolate chip cookies, and whenever I make them for non-vegans, they obsess and can't get enough. It is that good, but I'm not stingy. I'm happy to give it to you so you can make them and spread the love. Just head to the show description, click on the link for a cookie recipe, and it's all yours. You can thank me later. I'm exposing my own inner conflict and inner chaos I'm experiencing because I do coach people on that very concept of what can you reduce, even if it's just the creamer in your coffee. Can you choose a non-dairy creamer? So I'm walking. Well, I'm talking I don't know. I'm trying to embody all of it, but I also want to be honest about the inner conflict that's present.
Yeah, and I think it's great and I commend it. And I think it's important because I think what you're expressing, I don't think I know because this is my experience, what you're expressing is it's an inner conflict that many vegans experience. And it causes, it causes a lot of suffering among vegans. There are really high rates of burnout among vegans. And one
Yeah.
reason is because, there's such a sense of responsibility. It's like you care so much. You just want the suffering and the harm to end so badly and to do everything you can. It's because we care so much, There's so much pressure on our shoulders to feel like, oh my God, I've got to do everything I can to get this person to stop eating animals. And it's exhausting and it's deeply frustrating and it's a leading, contributor to burnout. And really, it's so important. Colleen Patrick Goudreau, you may know,
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
says, make your goal to plant seeds. That's all you can do, to plant
Hmm.
seeds. So after this conversation, you have shared enough information, so that the other person has what they need to be open to the issue. The information is out there if they want to get it. You don't have to tell them everything. It's not your responsibility to make people, quote unquote, go vegan. Just plant seeds. And what I would add to that is a couple of things. One is it's really, really important to give yourself permission not to advocate, not to feel responsible for turning people vegan around you, because it's like the job you never get to sign out of and or punch out of. And it is absolutely exhausting. And sometimes you need to just be you and not have to be this ambassador and this representative and carry the weight of lives and deaths on your shoulders. And when you give yourself permission not to advocate, you give yourself permission to just take care of yourself so you can recharge your batteries whenever you need to do that. You give yourself and you give the movement and the animals a great gift. And that is the gift of your sustainability and your mental wellness. And so that you will stay in this movement for the long haul and be able to advocate from a place of self-connection and also groundedness. And on top of this, big change for animals is institutional change. Getting one person at a time to stop eating animals, that's not going to shift the needle. I mean, it's great if we can do it to the best of our ability, but I would just really recommend don't twist yourself into a pretzel because the people around you are still eating animals. It's like we're talking about over 8 billion people in the world today, most of whom are still eating animals. And the change is going to come when there's bigger institutional shifts. I'm not saying individual advocacy is not important. I am saying that, especially when we care so much, we perceive individuals who are eating animals as doing a lot more harm than they're actually doing. I mean, this person, especially if you've just watched some video and you're worked up and you're like, oh my God, and then you see this person in your life who's, tucking into a burger and you're like, you're the reason those poor cows were suffering in that video.
Yep. Yep. Guilty.
Normal. It's a very
Oh,
normal psychological reaction.
okay. All right. Thank you. And for the vegans listening, let's all just take a big deep breath and give ourselves a break and not feel so responsible for changing the world. So I'm curious what you do to balance out all of this activism, all of your work toward positive change. What outlets, what practices
Mm.
are in your life to temper all of the hard work?
Well, I mean, one thing I've learned along the way, and when I was a young activist, I was really just pushing myself because, for the reasons that we've been talking about. When you've kind of woken up to what's happening in the world and the extent of harm that's happening, and you care deeply, it's really hard to slow down,
Mhm.
And then when you do slow down, it's really hard to even appreciate those moments of having slowed down because, images just jump into your mind. You can have flashbacks to horrible things you've seen or imaginings of horrible things are happening. And,
Yes.
and this is PTSD, and I do want to mention this. Many people in this movement do suffer from some form of traumatization, because carnism is a traumatic system. I mean, it's causing mass trauma. It's, you know, traumatizing animals, people who work, you know, in animal factories, and beyond, and many vegans who have been, or many people who have been witness to what's happening. You know, we've seen the videos, and it can be very traumatic. So it's really, really important. And I am very committed to this myself. You know, you asked about me, and I'll talk about myself. And I just want to say, for anybody who is, you know, committed to, for anybody, period, right? But especially if you're trying to help create a more compassionate world, you know, you're aware of these horrors all the time. It's heavy, it's hard, and it's very important to take care of yourself. Like, prioritize your self-care, you know, prioritize your mental health. Because if you don't, you will pay for it if you're not already paying for it, and you will be a lot less effective and probably not stay in this movement for very long. And if you do, you know, you've probably seen people who have not taken care of themselves, and I don't want to blame people for their own suffering at all. I'm just saying that when we don't attend to our needs, our mental health needs, you know, our physical needs, our own personal needs, which is very easy to do when you're so tuned into all of the needs that are out there. And, you know, you can compare yourself and go, God, compared to like what's happening in slaughterhouses, you know, who am I to take a night off?
Right.
The thing is that if you don't do that, and in particular, you know, learn about trauma, and I have a lot of resources we do at my organization, Beyond Carnism, for people to determine whether they've been traumatized or not, and how to take care of themselves, and prevent traumatization from happening in the future. If you don't take care of yourself, you're probably going to move towards burnout. And very often, you know, vegans who are burning out, even if they stay in the movement, they drag other vegans down. They turn people off from the movement. You know, they contribute to toxic infighting that's wasting a tremendous amount of resources. So for me personally, I'm really committed to my own self-care and to my own mental health. And I really, really understand that if my regulation, and I've said this many times before, and I cannot stress it enough, the most important thing any of us can do is to commit to our own self-regulation, and to saying, and I'll explain what this is, I'm going to stay as regulated as possible in my life, you know, on a day-to-day basis. By doing that, I am the person I need to be to keep doing this work in the way that I want to be doing it. So, you know, maybe some listeners may be familiar with this term dysregulation. You know, dysregulation is the state of your nervous system being out of balance, right? So you're dysregulated when, you know, everybody knows what dysregulation feels like, because we all feel dysregulated off and on throughout a given day. And some of us live in a dysregulated state pretty frequently. When you're dysregulated, it's sort of like when you're in a quasi, like a fight or flight or freeze state, you know, it's like being slightly triggered. Yeah. It's, some people say being triggered, but that's usually a little bit stronger, but it can be, you can be very dysregulated, you know, where you're like really triggered, or you can be mildly dysregulated. And your dysregulation can be triggered by a lot of different things. Maybe you're overstimulated, maybe you're a highly sensitive person, and you're, you know, not giving yourself permission just to take breaks during the day and to, like, you know, be in quiet environments so you can recharge your batteries. I don't know. There are lots of things that cause dysregulation. And most people, you know, have not learned about dysregulation and just like live in a state of dysregulation, or they don't know how to get out of it, or they try to get out of it in ways that are not particularly helpful. They might lash out at somebody else, or like get drunk, or, you know, whatever. So if you can commit every day, ideally several times a day, just checking in with yourself and saying, do I feel in balance? What's happening in my nervous system right now? How balanced does my nervous system feel? Do I feel grounded? Do I feel, you know, or am I racy? Am I racy? Am I contracted? Do I have that squished feeling in my chest? Do I have butterflies in my stomach? You know, whatever. Learn about, I have something on, we have this on our infighting website called identifying your dysregulation signature. Like, know how dysregulation shows up in your body, know what triggers it for you, know what helps you come down from it. When you become an expert on your own dysregulation and regulation, your life is going to really change, right? And so
Yeah.
that's the one thing I would say to all vegans, to all people, is to commit to staying regulated, which might mean getting off social media and
Yeah.
changing other things in your life, but or at least changing your relationship with it. So that's one thing that's very important. And also, again, for me personally, something that's been very, very helpful in helping me to stay like grounded to the degree that I can.
Yeah.
Um, given the world that we live in, give yourself permission to like be like upset and messed up once in a while, because it's a very dysfunctional world that we've been born into. We've just been born into like an incredible mess of a world, and it's just going to mess you up a bit. And that's, you kind of have to give yourself permission to be that once in a while. And like to build relational literacy is the other, I think, very important practice that I would recommend that's been transformational in my own life. And relational literacy, I define as the understanding of and ability to practice healthy ways of relating to ourselves and to others. And this includes, of course, effective ways of communicating, because communication is the primary way we relate. And you know better than anyone, you're a coach. When you communicate effectively, when you learn, it is not rocket science, right? It feels like it, it might seem like it. It is not rocket science. When you learn some of the basic principles and tools for effective communication and healthy relating, your life just really can really change. So many people are just so stressed because they can't get through to the people they care about, especially when you've got a big ideological difference like vegan, non-vegan relationship, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But even then, I mean, people get into it over like, should we stay in or go out on a Saturday night? And that can spiral into, a horrible argument. So
Yeah.
once you build these skills, your relationships become much smoother in general, and your life becomes a lot easier for that reason.
So, as someone who wrote this book, you must be an excellent communicator.
Yeah, well, you'll have to ask my husband.
Okay. Coming up in the next episode. That's awesome. And that's this Beyond Beliefs book is just a phenomenal piece of work. I have found in my life so many benefits from being a vegan, and so many of them are just obvious. They're repeated by every vegan out there. More energy and sleep better, and skin looks like it's glowing, and all those things. But one of the other things that I honor my veganism for is finding my authentic voice, really stepping
Mm,
into a comfortable place of speaking truth and kind of that, no blanks to give. And maybe it's being 50. I really think it's part of this vegan journey of being comfortable with who I am and having to experience a lot of opposition and
mm.
friction on a regular basis, that it's kind of like a take me or leave me attitude. That's my authentic voice. I do try to present more gently with clients and an audience. But I'm curious, with your new piece of fiction work,
Hmm.
which is so exciting after all of these nonfiction works, this book, A Half-Hearted Death Wish. I'm wondering if this project is in any way a result of your vegan journey and an expression of creativity and your authentic voice.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. I haven't thought of it that way. Yeah, I mean, I would say that I mean, I was always a creative. I was supposed to be a creative. Like my parents, my family expected me to go into the arts, and I didn't, but I
I,
did
I
plan to.
and I don't mean to interrupt you. I've heard you say you're a musician. I'm curious what you play or what you do. Do you
Yeah,
sing or?
I'm not really a musician anymore, but I was when I was younger, and I was supposed to be like that was the plan for me. I was supposed to be a professional musician. I played flute, and
Wow.
that was the plan. I was planning to go to music school and
Hmm.
just to become a professional musician. But I also had a real passion for writing music, and I did just a couple of years ago, finally, after backburnering the music I had been composing. I had worked on composing an album, and I had been working on that, when I was in my 20s, and then I think I stopped at 30 or something. And yeah, I mean, before 30. And then I came back to it a couple of years ago and just wrote the album and finished the album, produced it, I should say,
Wow.
too. So that felt great, like coming back to my roots sort of. And so I had always been, I think being creative predated being vegan, but they probably, they're both aspects of who I am. And yeah, I was able to just in later life. I mean, I'm 59 now. I'm going to be 60 this year. So, I'm
Amazing. Mazel tov.
finally coming. Well, you too. Um, Plant-based diet.
Right?
Well, it certainly helps. I couldn't imagine. I think I'm. In many ways, I'm healthier now than I was when I was in my 20s when I was
For
eating
sure.
meat. It was kind of interesting to see that because at the time I didn't even know it. I thought I was just like, please don't let me get sick, and now I'm like, oh, I'm actually thriving.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so then I had always wanted to write fiction, and last year I published A Half-Hearted Death Wish, and it was a great experience. It's definitely something I'd like to do more of. Like, I really found that writing fiction, I was in more of a flow state than I've been in for a while. I sort of always have to be doing some sort of creative project, and I do that through my organization Beyond Carnism. I've written and directed a bunch of shorts, videos.
Mm.
And that's been great. That fulfills the creative urge. It scratches the creative itch.
Right?
But writing a novel took that to a whole different level, and it was a great experience. And I mean, it is sort of the novelization of my work in many ways. It's got the same themes that I talk about woven through it. It's not, I wouldn't call it like a vegan or animal book or anything like that. I wouldn't label it that, but the themes of my work are woven through it. I don't want to give anything away
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
readers who
Yeah.
haven't read it. It's a mystery, right? So
Mm.
the main character is her name is Emma. She's a psychologist who wakes up one day to discover that her will to live has been replaced by a burning desire to be dead. So she's got this like strange suicidal urge, and she does not know where it came from. And she's actually in excellent mental health. She's not depressed, except, for the fact that now she feels like she's going to kill herself. She doesn't have anxiety. So she goes on this journey of discovery to try to figure out the cause of this strange psychological flu she seems to have come down with. And then through this journey of discovery, a lot of things about her life unfold. And she's sort of in a race against time because as a psychologist, especially, she knows that the unconscious has a way of fulfilling its desires. And so she's sort of trying to figure out what has gone wrong with her before she unwittingly steps in front of a car or falls out a window or whatever else might happen to her. Yeah. And so on this journey of discovery, she discovers a lot of things. I won't say more than that because it's a
Right.
mystery.
Yeah. Well, I love a good thriller. So that's amazing. Kudos to your creativity for coming up
Thank
with
you.
it. See, so there's that, like, the veganism paved the way for this crazy creative thought.
Maybe, or
I like
maybe
to think.
maybe the creativity paved the way for the veganism. I think they go hand in hand.
There you
I
go.
think that's sort of the nice thing about practicing or living a vegan lifestyle is that you can come at it from anybody. I mean, I know so many people over the years. I've met so many interesting people who have found their way to veganism through all these different routes. Carpenter spending so much of his time being mindful, working with his hands, being outside, connecting with nature, and then exposed to information about veganism. And it just all made sense for him. And then
Yeah.
artists who are like out of the box thinkers. And suddenly it's like, wait a minute, why have I been following this practice, this dietary practice that actually isn't in alignment with who I want to be? People can come at this from so many different angles. And one thing I want to say, and I think especially for your listeners, because you have this mixed audience, which I think is really wonderful. And so I think it's very it's understandable, that many vegans sort of and non-vegans think that either you're vegan and you're part of the solution or you're not vegan and you're part of the problem. And
Hmm.
I want to just sort of reframe that a little bit. And I like to talk about something that I call a vegan ally, which is a
Mm.
person who is a supporter of veganism, who believes, like many people who eat animals, if you talk to them, they will say, of course, I believe that it's wrong to harm animals. Of course, I never want to cause animals to suffer, and they're in this system, like they've been born into this like very warped, weird system that's conditioned them to think and act in certain ways. And, being a vegan ally simply means that like you're a supporter of veganism and vegans, even though you're not yet fully vegan yourself. Maybe you're as vegan as possible, whatever that means for you. And some of the people who have done the most good for the cause are not vegans. People I
Yeah.
meet who are journalists or interviewers, they write articles about the issue. They reach like hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of people. A lot of my publishers are not vegan,
Right.
and they're so excited about getting the book, pushing the book out there as, as far as they can, because they
Mm.
so believe in the message. And when you think about it just from an impact perspective, some people who are not vegan have spared more animals' lives than some people who simply don't eat animals all their lives. So there are lots of ways to support the cause.
Yeah. Yeah, it is so true, so amazing. I was out to lunch with a friend and our daughters, and this friend of mine, when we're together, she makes a vegan choice. So we're out to lunch and she orders the vegan pancakes. Our daughters both got the regular pancakes, but I've got the tofu scramble and she ordered the vegan pancakes. And her daughter immediately sort of attacked her, saying, "Why are you ordering the vegan pancakes? Is it just because Jenny's here? Because you would never do that otherwise." And I kind of chimed in for my friend and I said, if your mother wants to get the vegan pancakes simply because she's sitting across from me, beautiful. Why do you
Mm-hmm.
care? It's not your
Mm-hmm.
dish, so you don't have to worry about eating some sort of inferior meal. But yeah, I my friend is a vegan ally and it just means a lot to me that in my presence she makes that choice. And I don't know if she goes home and has a BLT or a steak. I don't know. I don't see it, but it is a really special emotional experience for me.
That's a really great example. And, even just like feeling like seeing your face when you're talking about it and your energy, like you feel connected. Like it's like I'm thinking as you're talking, I'm like, there's a real connection there. And so many vegans, can get really despairing and really frustrated. I've talked to, heard from literally thousands of vegans over the years who have said that like, becoming vegan is one of the most empowering choices they've made in their lives,
Hmm.
and yet that sense of empowerment, that sense of inspiration that they felt quickly turns to shock and horror when they discover that their friends and family members are, like their relationships are breaking down and their communication is breaking down. And so what
Hmm.
do? They think to themselves, understandably, I just need to get everybody around me to go vegan, because if they go vegan, then the problem will go away. And as you probably know, like, the people who are closest to us are not really people that make sense to advocate to. And it's a whole different complicated dynamic. And the harder a vegan pushes for the non-vegans in their life to go vegan, the more those non-vegans tend to resist, and you can get into all sorts of, problematic dynamics. But
Yes.
but asking, a person in your life to be a vegan ally is a whole different animal. What many vegans discover is that when the people in their lives become vegan allies, everything changes in their experience. It's like, wait a minute. I didn't actually need you to be vegan to feel connected to you. I mean, this loss of connection in relationships is so deeply painful for people.
Hmm.
And that's often what people are seeking. It's like, okay, yes, you want this person to be vegan for lots of different reasons, but underneath that is often a desire to reconnect. I want to feel close to you again. I want to feel connected to you again. And it's really hard for me to feel connected to you when it's hard for me to respect what you're doing, and when I feel invisible to you, when you don't even see what's so near and dear to my heart. When for listeners who are saying, oh yeah, I can relate to this, one thing that you can do is to say to the people in your life, listen, I would really love to share information with you about veganism, not to turn you vegan, but so you understand me, so you know what the world looks like through my eyes. Because when you do, you'll be less likely to say things that offend me, and like, how can you have any degree of closeness if people don't really understand your inner world? And very often that is enough to restore connection. And sometimes the connections can be even deeper than they had been before. And this is one of the reasons we created this video, what to say to vegans. Let me just show you this video. You can use this. It's
Hmm.
just on our website. This is what the world looks like through my eyes. And just
Yeah.
like your beautiful story of your friend, like you probably don't feel like she has to be vegan for you to feel close to her, because she gets it and she's an ally to you. She
Yeah.
sees you.
The opening story in your Beyond Beliefs book, I forget their names, but Maria and somebody, the husband and wife who they go to Thanksgiving dinner or some holiday dinner,
Hmm.
and she's confronted with all the flesh on the table, and then they're making jokes. And then the disconnect between her husband and her because he laughed at the joke, and then they drive home and both staring out their respective windows. And that was such a specific and relatable image, feeling what she's feeling. And it was a really compelling start to that book. So I just felt seen in that one introductory chapter. It was like, oh wow, clearly this happens for her to put it in a book. So it's not unique to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that and thank you for that feedback. And it's one of those things that it's not, I mean, just with like relationship struggles in general, there are a lot of things that people experience that are so deeply painful for them, but don't realize that other people are having very similar experiences, and there's a way out of it. Like there are things
Hmm.
you can do to shift the dynamic. And, and especially I wrote this book because I had been relationships. I was a relationship coach for a long time and I'm a psychologist. And that was sort of like the other hat that I used to wear and another passion of mine and sort of wedding two of the sides of my life, which was like helping with relationships and communication and veganism and carnism. And so I felt compelled to write that book because there was nothing out there. And I
Yeah.
remember myself like going through this with non-vegan partners when I was a young vegan and just struggling so much and kind of like, oh, I don't want to laugh along with them at their jokes, their, anti-vegan jokes, because then I'm participating in my own oppression. But like if I don't laugh, then I'm that like, stuck up vegan that, has no sense
Can't
of
take a
humor,
joke. Right.
can't take a joke, right? And it's just like,
Yeah.
oh my God, it's like no win.
Yes.
Um, it's hard. It is
Yes.
hard. And, to your point, I think you said this earlier, being in a position where you're an ideological minority, you're an ideological, your ideology, your, belief system around this anyway is in the minority. It does force you to develop strategies and strength and resilience, that you might not have had to develop otherwise. Like you really have to learn. I remember in my early days, like I was like, I really have to learn how to talk about things. Like I can't just blurt things out anymore like I used to because that doesn't work. Like even when I'm saying them pretty eloquently, it's not working. So there's because it's so easy with carnism, creating these psychological defenses in people that like you can get into this battle of defenses, but what
Yeah.
about the animals? What will we do with all the animals if like people
Yes.
stopped eating them? We get overrun, and then you become
Yes.
the vegan stereotype where it's like, oh my God, you're expected to have like all of the answers to the problem of carnism, or you're not allowed to talk about the fact that it's a problem, right? Like so you have to be an expert on like
Hmm.
organic, veganic, hydroponic mushroom farming and agricultural economics and like, nutrition and like who has all those answers? But so many vegans, again, care so much and like, I want to represent this movement well. I want to
Right.
do right by the animals. And oh my God, if I don't hold my own in this conversation and they continue eating animals, then it's my fault. And I'm like indirectly killing animals then. And like all of this pressure, like,
Mhm.
no, no, this is not your fault. This is a
Yeah.
system that is set up to create these negative stereotypes of you, put you in an impossible position, so that then when you can't answer all the questions that are hurled at your way, which of course you can't, it just
Right.
becomes an excuse to invalidate everything you stand for. Not your fault. You get to say, I don't know, because you're human and you don't know. Like
Right.
nobody has all the answers to this problem.
That's why so many of us go down this educational rabbit hole and keep taking course and certification after another so that we have more answers. I got the vegan certification. Now I'm getting the plant-based certification. And then I saw that there's a sustainability certification. And like you said, I'm sure there's some mushroom farming certification that I could get. And it's like, wait, I don't have to know everything. I love
Right,
that.
right. I don't have to know everything and I can't know everything. And you can even
Yeah.
just say that to people, like, when it starts coming at me and I'm like, I don't have the answer. Like, how could I possibly have the answer? Does this mean like one should not criticize or point out the problems with capitalism if they haven't figured out what kind of economic system is going to
Right.
like heal our future? Because that means we never get to talk about problems if we
Yeah, we
have
never
to
get
have
to
all
talk
the
about
solutions.
anything.
We never get to talk about anything.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
And it's one of the reasons I wrote Beyond Beliefs was also, not simply to help vegans and non-vegans navigate relationships and vegans navigate relationships, but also to provide a resource to vegans who, struggle with having internalized these negative images, or these negative messages, like how many vegans apologize for being quote unquote picky eaters because they're like, right, like, okay,
I was a
you like,
pickier eater when I was just eating meat and dieting. Then it was like, oh, can you go, like, can you make that without oil dressing on the side? And no, I don't want that and that. And can you put that in? I was way
right.
more difficult. Now I'm like, just throw anything with vegetables on a plate.
Right. And no matter how easygoing you are, you still might get labels because this is the
Yeah.
way the system is set up. Like carnism is structured like other similar systems. It's structured to maintain itself, to keep itself alive. And what that means is that it has to legitimize carnism and all of the myths that go along with it. Eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary, and to weaken veganism, to make veganism illegitimate, and that happens through all sorts of means, and one of which is pathologizing vegans, right? So how many vegans have been, called hypersensitive, or overly sensitive animal loving sentimentalists, right? Because,
Yep. Yep.
and when you think about it, right, this is a way of shooting the messenger, right? If you shoot the messenger, you don't have to take seriously the implications of their message. And referring to people who challenge violence and dominant systems as overly sensitive, that has happened historically. Anti-slavery abolitionists were called sentimentalists.
Yeah.
Suffragettes who were advocating for women's right to vote were called hysterical. If somebody is overly emotional, by definition, they're not rational, and somebody who's not rational is not worth being listened to. And so this really shuts down a conversation, and vegans can internalize this message and feel ashamed of themselves and ashamed of their sensitivity, when in fact, our sensitivity it's not only is it beautiful, it's a strength. And our emotions of grief and sorrow and sometimes maybe moral outrage, these are actually legitimate psychological responses to the global atrocity that is carnism. Much more psychologically concerning is the numbing of the majority, this numbing of the average person who's not reacting this way. So, but knowing that, just having that knowledge can help a person go from shame to empowerment. And there are lots of different stereotypes that I think are very important for that many vegans have internalized and carry around and feel ashamed of, and kind of try to mask or whatever. Whereas if they recognize these as forms of carnistic prejudice, essentially, they would, instead of believing in these negative stories, they would be able to kind of unblend or separate from them.
Okay, so I know we didn't really get into the big topic of infighting yet.
Infighting is like outfighting, except that it is directed toward members of one's own group. And unfortunately, infighting is it's epidemic
Yeah.
in many movements, not just our movement. It's just
Mhm.
it's among people, because people, unfortunately, most of us have had to learn complicated geometry that we'll probably never need to use, and yet we don't get a single formal lesson in how to relate healthfully and communicate in a way that's effective. We have a website, infighting.org. It's got tons of information. It was supposed to be a book, but I was like done writing nonfiction books. So I'm like, this is going to be a website. It's going to be more accessible that way anyway. It's got lots of information on dysregulation. You can get information about your dysregulation signature on there, effective communication strategies, and all sorts of, sort of tips how to relate to anger in a healthy way, how to engage in self-care, and so on.
So helpful. Yeah, it is an epidemic. And as a former teacher way back in the day, I
Oh,
can tell
well.
you, we teach kids a lot of useless information,
Mm.
whereas, how to communicate would be way more valuable. So thank God you're out here doing the work for us grown-up kids who have a lot of useless geometry in our brains.
Yeah, well, thank God you're doing the work that you're doing, which is like inviting people into conversations they might not be invited into and amplifying messages that need to get out there in the world. It's so, so important, especially with like just so much dysfunctional information and toxic information just like flooding the digital airwaves.
Yes. Yes. Well, This has been such a delightful conversation. Before I let you go, I
Thank
do
you.
have a couple final things. First of all, tell everybody where, I know you mentioned websites, you mentioned books. Tell people where to get what you want them to get.
Sure. So all of my books are available on our websites, primarily carnism.org. They can get lots of information about carnism there and the books, carnism.org, veganadvocacy.org. You can go for courses. We have everything is free. The books are not free. They're owned by publishers. So there's that, but everything else is free.
Yeah.
So we have lots of videos also on carnism.org and veganadvocacy.org, training materials, tips for communicating about veganism and so on and so forth. And then we have infighting.org, the website I just mentioned.
Mm, so good. All of that will be in the show notes, and
Great.
I
Thank
really
you.
encourage listeners to check that out, get the books. Just so much good stuff. So,
Thank you.
so much, yes, very supportive stuff.
Thank you. And one thing I wanted to add, I realized I forgot to mention, I'll say this really quickly, is that for people who are, feeling like there's some trauma, or I talk about this in Beyond Beliefs, and we have information about trauma and sustainable advocacy, taking care of yourself on veganadvocacy.org. One thing I do want to recommend is just to stop looking at any kind of graphic imagery and graphic videos. Just give yourself permission to not look. And if somebody tries to share that with you, just let them know that you can't take that in because it's not good for you. Because a lot of vegans continue to consume that, feeling like they should, without realizing that you don't need to consume that information to do the important work that you're doing. In fact, it's probably true that you need to stop consuming it in order to keep doing the important work you're doing.
So perfectly said. I have begun to practice that myself because I was of the belief that the more I saw, the more educated I would be, the more
Right.
powerful my message would be. And there was actually a moment a couple weeks ago where I put on my favorite streaming service, Unchained TV.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm always curious what's new on the platform? What have I not watched yet? And I'm scrolling through the documentaries and I was like, oh, I haven't watched this sled dog movie. And I turned it on, and a couple minutes in, I said, Jenny, stop. You know the suffering. You've seen
Mm-hmm.
enough. I did have to tell myself it's time to watch more about nutrition or more about successful vegans or people's work, but you don't need to
Mm-hmm.
see footage. Enough is enough.
Good for you. I'm glad to hear you did that.
Yep, it took a while. I probably watched a little too much before getting to that point, but nonetheless, I got to it. So, my final question is, and I know you're a very healthy vegan, but would you please share with the listeners some of your favorite vegan foods, meals, snacks, things you like to eat?
Oh God. I don't know. I don't even have favorites. I don't know. I like a great vegan pizza. I was always a pizza lover, so healthy vegan pizza, healthy crust, healthy, as healthy as it can be. It doesn't have to be perfect. And yeah, I guess that would be my favorite. I like a great kale salad.
Mm.
I love food. I just love so many foods. So as long as it's relatively healthy,
Mhm.
and tasty and vegan, I'm happy.
Yeah. And we have so much available to us, so there's no
So much,
shortage.
so much.
Well, Dr. Melanie Joy, this has been a joy for me. So I am eternally grateful for your time and your wisdom.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. You're so easy to talk to, and your questions are great. So thank you.
I am still buzzing from the reality that I got to sit across the screen from Dr. Melanie Joy and have such a deep, powerful conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you'll share it with people you know and love. Now, let me get to the juicy bits from this conversation. Number one, what is carnism? Carnism is the invisible belief system that conditions people to eat certain animals and not others. It's truly the opposite of veganism because everybody has a belief system. And for those of you listening who live with the slightest bit of privilege, there is a choice to eat meat, and choices stem from beliefs, but they're invisible. Number two, carnism is a global system, meaning each culture has their own list of animals that they eat and don't eat. And each culture finds other cultures' way of doing things offensive, wrong, and irrational. Number 3, carnism is a dominant belief system, and it's so common that it's invisible and woven through the fabric of society. It shapes norms, laws, and behaviors, and it affects all social institutions. Number 4, we use psychological defense mechanisms to disconnect us from the reality of what we're doing when we're supporting slaughter and consumption of animals. And those defense mechanisms are the 3 N's of justification, meaning animal eaters tell themselves it's normal, natural, and necessary as a way to justify practices that support violence and suffering. Number 5, carnistic systems condition people to feel defensive against anyone that challenges their right to eat animals. It conditions them to resist anyone that would get them out of that carnistic box. This is why meat eaters stand so stubbornly and steadfastly in that position of being right to eat meat. Number 6, the quickest way to reduce the massive amount of animal suffering that's going on globally is to ask people to simply be as vegan as possible. Number 7, there is a high rate of burnout amongst vegans, activists, and my guest Gary Yourofsky spoke to this as someone who did experience unimaginable pain and suffering because of his work to protect animals, and that's why he had to take a decade off from activism. So if you are a vegan activist listening, please give yourself permission not to advocate. By doing so, you give the movement the gift of your sustainability. Number 8, the most important thing any of us can do is commit to our own self-regulation, keeping the nervous system in balance. Number 9, a vegan ally, which hopefully all of us vegans have, is a supporter of vegans. Someone who perhaps is being as vegan as possible right now, but also someone who believes our message, even if they aren't there yet. Because it's so important for us vegans to feel seen and have our inner world understood. So number 10, encourage your friends and family to watch Melanie's lovely little video, What to Say to Vegans. It's like showing people, here's how the world looks to me. Number 11, vegans are often shamed to apologize, and they're labeled as picky and overly sensitive because carnism is structured to maintain itself. But vegans, keep in mind, our sensitivity is beautiful. It's a strength. And what's really concerning is the global scale numbing. Number 12, be sure to check out all of Melanie's links that are in the show notes, carnism.org, veganadvocacy.org, and infighting.org. And finally, number 13, Dr. Melanie Joy's favorite vegan foods include a healthy vegan pizza, a kale salad, and really anything that is healthy, tasty, and vegan. And if you've been listening to this show and hearing other guest recommendations, then you know by now there are countless options that are healthy, tasty, and vegan. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope you will share it and continue to spread the important messages Dr. Melanie Joy is expressing. So be sure to check the show notes for her links, as well as the link to book a free connection call with me, and also the link for the free chocolate chip cookie recipe. You do not want to miss that one. I wish you a wonderful couple of weeks. I'll see you right back here for my next interview with the beautiful and talented Kate Galley. And as always, it is with a heart full of gratitude and a fridge full of veggies that I send you peace, love, and chickpeas. Mwah!